Mike Pereira is the former VP of Officiating, the NFL Fox Rules analyst here on the Rich Eisen Show. Thanks for holding, Mike. How you doing today, Michael?
I'm thinking that you have Larry Fitzgerald tonight.
Yeah,
is that right?
I do. Yes.
Well, you're not going to get any points because they're going to interfere with them and they're not going to call it.
Let's get to it. What I mean, how does this? Let's put it this way. What is your one of your successors, Dean Blandino, doing today? Is he taking angry calls from Atlanta? And the Giants, who, even though they won, got a DPI called on them that I'm still shaking my head over how that got called, Mike?
Angry from Atlanta. The anger is not nearly as bad from a team that wins, and so I would put that back in the category of question. But there's going to be a lot of heat that comes from the play in Seattle, and really he should expect that because it was not one of the toughest ones that has to be called. I mean, and I do think sometimes you get angles where you can't see things. I don't think that's the case here, and to me it was early enough, and you talk about, an arm being pinned down. I think the fact is that the chairman of the competition committee, Rich McKay, who is obviously from Atlanta,
yep.
I think the discussion is going to start really quickly on making pass interference reviewable in replay, and I'm to the point where I think it should be. I mean, you can't have these types of big plays and have them not reviewable. I get the fact that there's judgment, and if it's close, then you leave it the way it is. But you're reviewing illegal touches of passes, which lead basically just to a loss of down, not even a yardage thing. So, you've got a pass interference call of 66 yards. I think it was against Detroit that turned out to be an incorrect call. At least that's what I heard. 66 yards worth of penalties. The play at the end of the game in Seattle, the CFL does it. They experimented with it a year ago. They liked the way it worked out, and I think if you're going to have a play that has the punitive yardage that pass interference does, that far downfield where you could have a 40 or 50-yard penalty, then make it reviewable. Make it easier on the officials because it's the toughest call that they have to make in the field, and make it fair. I'm now, after this weekend, convinced that they ought to do that.
Would you please do me a favor and put Mike Pereira on the phone? Because this guy who sounds like the Fox Rules analyst and former VP of Officiating, Mike Pereira,
can you please, looking for Mike Pereira?
Yeah, can you put the Mike Pereira, who's been hearing me say exactly what he just said for years? Can you put that Mike Pereira on the phone, please?
Do I not eventually come your way, though, whether it's a tuck rule or whether it's a...
Follow me to freedom, Mike. Just listen to what I say and follow me to freedom. That's all I'm trying to say.
I guess I just got to kind of get on board with you earlier. But let's face it. I mean, let's face it. That this is... I do think it's the hardest penalty to call. Hey, listen, this is an obvious pass interference.
Of course.
It's really obvious in slow motion, but, you saw the reaction from the sideline from Atlanta. You saw what they saw and the way that they reacted on the sidelines. I just think that you've entered the area of judgment in replay. You got to make it a challenge situation unless it's inside of 2 minutes, and then the replay guy can take over. Might you create some more challenges? Yeah, you might create some more challenges, and I'm not necessarily a fan of that. But if you're looking at 40, 50-yard plays, then you have to talk to the Canadian Football League. Heck, you got NFL guys that are working in the Canadian Football League now. So they actually, work under the system where it is reviewable when they work their games in the early season in Canada. So you got to look at that play, and if I'm Dean Blandino, and certainly I'm not Dean Blandino, but if it was me and I was still in there, I mean, I think when Rich McKay called me and said, Mike, Mike, how can we have this? I would say to the chairman of the competition committee, it's number one on my list to talk about making it reviewable now.
I love it, Mike Pereira. I love it. So before we get to the Giants DPI and what in the world happened there, as well as what happens to the official who called it defensive pass interference when Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie had clear position, what's the reality of that happening? The politics of the competition committee and owners, some of whom still, if they got the chance, would vote replay out entirely. There's some old guard guys who own teams in the NFL. What is the reality of making pass interference reviewable when it's all said and done?
There's there's more new guard guys than there are old guard guys. It takes 24 votes to pass something, so it is achievable. I think that the one thing to me that would give it legs is the Canadian Football League, because they can go to a league and say, how does it work? And how, what kind of situations did it create? And from everything I'm hearing, the CFL, they're happy with it, because in the divisional playoffs for the Grey Cup last year, they had a pass interference miss at the end of the game that they corrected. So I just think that if, at least my feeling is, either you make it reviewable or you make it a maximum 15-yard penalty one way or the other, because it's too risky right now, and there's too many yards when it comes to, is it or isn't it called? And it puts so much pressure on the officials. You're not talking about a maximum 15-yard penalty. You're talking, in that case, in the game last night, 40 yards or whatever. To me, it's time.
So what happens to the official in the Giants-Ravens game? That was I've never seen anything like it. I mean, Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie was running. He had position. He didn't create contact. The receiver came over his top. I don't even know how that's possible. That's so awful.
Well, I've heard, and I haven't seen the all-22 tape, but I heard there was some explanation given that the contact was earlier in the route at the
flags
break.
Came as he was entering the end zone.
I saw it, and to me, what I tweeted out, it's like, okay, I've seen it happen before, where you get mixed up. I've seen blocks in the back called, and it's a block in the back against a kicking team. It can't happen. They get the wrong player, and that's almost what it looks like to me. It's nothing. It shouldn't be offensive or defensive based on everything we saw. And what happens to the official? The same thing. I mean, there is accountability. There's going to be accountability at the end of the Seattle game. Probably two officials reasonably could have made the call, and then the one that did make the call in the Giants game, they are downgrades, which end up keeping you out of the playoffs. If you have very many of them, you could be out of the playoffs, and if you have very many of them over 2 years, you could be out of the league. I mean, there is always turnover. So the normal discipline, and I would call it discipline because they are negative grades that they get, will apply in both those cases.
A couple of minutes left with Mike Pereira, NFL on Fox rules analyst, as well as college football rules analyst. The NFL says it is looking into the latest piece of filthiness from Vontaze Burfict going low on Martellus Bennett from behind, with not even making a play on the ball. Why am I seeing that NFL media insider saying it's just going to be a large fine and not games? What do you think the NFL is looking at?
Fine and not games. They don't have any guts. I mean, if the guy was suspended for the first 3 games of the season, so you pile on punishment when you look at history, and he has history dating all the way back to college, for God's sakes. Obviously, it doesn't apply in the NFL, but I don't see how they can do anything but suspend him, because it was not a football act. He didn't lead with the helmet trying to break up a pass. He didn't do that. This was just a dead, intentional cheap shot. So, to me, I'm like shocked if the NFL doesn't maintain some leverage here and get rid of him for another couple of games.
Lastly, Mike, you were here a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the targeting rule in college football. It just seems week after week after week, even though video evidence shows that helmets didn't connect, that shoulder pads connect with chest, maybe graze the chin strap, that kids who are called for targeting after video evidence makes it seem like this wasn't a targeting. Kids are still getting the thumb, getting the gate. Am I missing something here on the rule?
What happened, really, which I thought was actually great, and it was involved in the West Virginia game. They called unnecessary roughness on the field. Unnecessary roughness was called, not targeting. But what happened was you looked at it in all the different replays, and you saw that, yes, in fact, it was flagrant targeting. He lowered his head, and he made earhole contact, picking a guy off the pile. And so replay got involved then and added targeting and ejected him. And you know what? I kind of like that, because They got to see everything first before they really called targeting upstairs. And to me, that's a way to rid yourself of these real marginal ones where you get a guy kicked out of the game. If you could find some discipline like that you could let replay look at it first to decide whether it's targeting, then I think you could define clear flagrant versus not flagrant.
But why should there be a problem with just calling it targeting first and looking at the visual evidence and saying it wasn't? Why does it matter what it was called first?
Yeah, but here's the issue. If you call it on the field, they're going to stay with it even if it's iffy because the call has been made on the field. And I don't think they will. I don't think they'll stray from that philosophy. So I kind of like if they could discuss this and say, call it unnecessary roughness, and then if it actually does rise to the level of something being flagrant, then let replay do it. And I'm telling you, the number of targeting calls would be down, and the number of ejections then clearly would be down. So I just saw it this weekend, and it seemed like it worked really well, and I think it's something to look at in the future.
Mike, thanks for coming on. Everybody should get Mike Pereira's book. Go check it out on Amazon.com. And Mike's working on a new book saying I should have listened to Rich Eisen much sooner, and he's always right.
And there's actually, that new book has just got one page in it.
Oh, no. Tuck rule?
Oh, 2 pages.
Okay.
2 pages.
There's a tuck rule, and this is 2 big things, Mike. Come on now. Thanks for coming on.
You got it.
That's Mike Pereira, NFL on Fox.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.